The night I cracked open my husband's safe, my hands shook so violently I could barely spin a dial. For almost 40 years, Richard Holmes had drilled it into me that we were barely scraping by. Instead, inside that hidden vault lay neat stacks of cash, stock accounts, and dark secrets tied directly to another woman's name. I didn't scream. I didn't steal a single dollar. Instead, I slipped in a sealed envelope, divorce papers, already signed right where the lawyer told me to. Then I locked that heavy door back up and waited for my husband to find the truth, just like I did. Completely alone, terrified, and far too late. Before I tell you what came next, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized the person you trusted completely was living an entire secret life behind your back? If so, tell me in the comments below. I read them all, because our stories deserve to be heard. If you are watching with me tonight, let me know where you are tuning in from and what time it is. Please subscribe and like this video if you connect with deep stories about family betrayal and reclaiming your inner strength. If you asked anyone on our block about Richard Holmes, they would smile before you even finished speaking. Oh, Richard? He is absolutely one of the good guys. That is what everyone always said. And for decades, I believed it too. We lived in Columbus, Ohio, in a quiet brick house framed by white shutters and manicured rose bushes. I planted those roses myself nearly 30 years ago. Richard worked as a financial manager for a manufacturing company downtown. He wore crisp button-down shirts, balanced our checkbook down to the single penny, and never missed a birthday. At church, men shook his hand like he was a living saint. During family dinners, our son Daniel quoted his advice like holy scripture. Megan, our daughter, always said her dad knew exactly what to do. Back then, I believed her. Back in those days, I thought a good husband just meant stability, predictable routines, bills paid on time, keeping the lights running. And Richard handled all of that. What I failed to see was how stability can slowly warp into a cage until you suddenly notice the bars decades down the road. When the kids were small, I worked part-time at a dental clinic. I truly loved that job. I loved chatting with patients, dressing up, and feeling independent. But the moment Daniel started school, Richard sat me down at the kitchen table, folding his hands as if he were delivering some crucial corporate business proposal. It makes more financial sense for you to stay home, he told me. I remember laughing softly. Financially, Richard? Daycare really is not that expensive. It is not just daycare, he answered smoothly. Gas, clothes, eating out, stress. We will save more if one of us focuses on the home. One of us, meaning me, obviously, not him. Back then, his words sounded perfectly reasonable, even responsible. That was Richard's real talent. He could disguise control inside logic so smoothly that I felt guilty for even questioning him. So I resigned, and slowly, my entire outside life vanished. At first, I did not mind. I genuinely loved raising our children. I packed their lunches, joined the school volunteer programs, and sat through endless soccer games on folding chairs, shivering in the biting Ohio wind. As the years slipped by, something shifted. Richard managed every single cent, every investment portfolio, and every tax document. Whenever I tried asking questions, he brushed them off with fast, confident answers designed to make me feel foolish. "We are okay, Carly, but we must be careful." That phrase became the constant background noise of my marriage. We must be careful. So, I slowly learned to stop wanting things. I bought my clothes from clearance racks. I dyed my own hair in our bathroom sink to save pennies. I clipped grocery coupons while Richard smiled and praised my thriftiness. Looking back on those days, I see a painful truth. He wanted me small, financially, emotionally, and socially. Small women are simply easier to control. What is strange is that Richard never raised his voice enough for anyone to label him as cruel. That made it incredibly confusing for decades. He was not an obvious monster. He was patient, quiet, and measured, which only made his manipulation harder to spot. Whenever I brought up taking a vacation, he just sighed. Maybe next year. Whenever I talked about updating our kitchen, he frowned, saying it was not smart. When our roof started leaking, Richard patched the shingles himself instead of paying a professional. "We cannot waste hard-earned money," he declared. And I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was the expert, after all. I was merely the housewife who had not held a job in decades. I remember standing in a department store 5 years ago, clutching a beautiful navy blue dress. It was not flashy, just elegant, the kind of piece that made me feel alive. I glanced at the price tag, $120. Before I could even make up my mind, Richard noticed and chuckled softly. "Carly, for that price, you will wear it twice." I hung it back up immediately. My face burned with embarrassment as younger women walked past me, carrying expensive shopping bags without a second thought. Back then, I convinced myself he was just being practical. Now I see the truth. A man who constantly tells you what you cannot afford is training you to stop asking. The older I grew, the more invisible I became in my own home. Yet, on the outside, our lives looked picture perfect. Weekly family dinners, holiday portraits, anniversary celebrations at that same local steakhouse every April. Richard holding my hand in public, calling me sweet names. Richard politely opening car doors. That is the thing about subtle emotional control. It never looks ugly to the neighbors. The first fracture in our facade appeared 2 years ago. I woke up near midnight and realized Richard's side of the bed was empty. I crept downstairs, fully expecting him to be asleep in front of the television screen. Instead, a sliver of light escaped from beneath his office door. Richard had always been incredibly guarded about that room. Never aggressively, just highly territorial. He stored all of his tax documents, corporate files, and accounts in there. I respected his boundaries. Husbands and wives are still entitled to some personal space, right? That is what I told myself anyway. But that night felt different. As I approached, I heard drawers sliding and files rustling, then complete silence. Before my hand could knock, the office light went dead. A few seconds later, Richard threw the door open so fast it startled me. His face looked tense for a split second before his usual smile returned. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded, slowly replying, "I could ask you the same thing." "Just organizing paperwork." "At midnight?" He laughed softly. "You know me. Can't sleep unless numbers make sense." I forced a smile, but as he walked past me toward the stairs, I noticed something new. He locked the office door behind him. Actually locked it. I stood there, staring at the brass handle long after he went upstairs. That moment should have hit me harder than it did. But after decades of brushing off bad feelings, my instincts had grown quiet. I had stopped listening to myself. Still, something shifted. After that night, I started noticing things I couldn't unsee. Richard grew strangely tense whenever the mail arrived. He started shredding papers immediately and began stepping outside to answer calls. And whenever I walked into his office unexpectedly, he minimized his computer screen so fast it looked completely rehearsed. One afternoon, while dusting the hallway bookshelf, I overheard him talking on the phone in a low voice. "I already transferred it," he whispered sharply. A pause. "No, she doesn't know anything." My stomach tightened instantly. She, not Carly. She. I stepped back before he caught me listening. That night at dinner, Richard talked casually about church renovations while buttering his bread as if nothing had happened. And for the first time in nearly 40 years of marriage, I looked across the table and realized I no longer knew the man sitting in front of me. A few weeks after overhearing Richard on the phone, Megan showed up at our front door with swollen eyes and a box full of her son's clothes. I opened the door and knew instantly something was wrong. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Can Liam stay here tonight?" Behind her stood my 8-year-old grandson, clutching a backpack almost as big as he was. My heart dropped. What happened? Megan looked exhausted in a way only heartbreak and fear can wear a person down. Her blonde hair was tied in a messy knot, and there were dark circles under her eyes I'd never seen before. "Tyler emptied the joint account," she whispered. "He hired a lawyer yesterday." I pulled her into my arms before she could even finish speaking. "Oh, sweetheart." That night, after Liam fell asleep upstairs, Megan sat crying at our kitchen table over untouched tea, while Richard watched with folded arms. "I just need a little help," she said quietly, "until I can figure things out." Richard leaned back slowly. "How much are we talking?" Megan hesitated. 5,000 maybe, just for the attorney and rent. I already knew my answer. Of course we would help her. She was our daughter. But before I could speak, Richard let out a heavy sigh. "Megan, I'm sorry, but we can't afford to hand out money like that right now." I stared at him. Hand out money? Megan blinked, fighting back tears. "Dad, I'm not asking for a vacation. I'm trying to protect my son." Richard rubbed his forehead, acting like she was just creating stress for him. "I understand that, but sometimes people have to face the consequences of their choices." The room went completely cold. Even Liam's cartoon playing faintly upstairs couldn't soften the cruelty of those words. Megan looked down, and I could see the shame washing over her. "Consequences?" I asked carefully. Richard turned to me calmly. She ignored the warning signs with Tyler for years. Anger flared in my chest so fast it shocked me. "She's scared, Richard. And throwing money at problems won't fix them." Megan stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "You know what?" she whispered shakily. "Forget I asked." "Megan," I started. "No, it's fine." But it wasn't. I followed her into the hallway as she grabbed Liam's jacket. "Sweetheart, listen to me." She wouldn't look at me. "I shouldn't have come." "Yes, you should have." "I'm 34 years old, and I had to beg my father for help." Her voice cracked. That sound haunted me for weeks. I secretly slipped her the emergency savings I kept hidden in a coffee tin in the laundry room. $900. Money I'd secretly pinched from groceries and birthday checks over the years. It wasn't nearly enough, but she cried like it was a fortune. Meanwhile, Richard stood in the kitchen pretending to read the newspaper, letting our daughter walk out the door feeling completely abandoned. That was the first night I really couldn't sleep beside my husband. I lay awake watching the ceiling fan as old memories replayed in my mind. Not just tonight's talk, but every single one before it. All the times Richard said no. No to helping Megan with college loans. No to repairing the upstairs bathroom. No to replacing our old car until it died in traffic. No to vacations. No to retirement trips. No to any extra spending. Always no. Always caution and sacrifice. And those sacrifices were almost always mine. The next morning, I found Richard sipping coffee at the kitchen island, as if nothing had happened. "You were hard on her," I said quietly. He didn't even look up from his tablet. She needed honesty. She needed support. She's emotional. I stared in disbelief. She's getting divorced. And whose fault is that? Something inside me snapped at those cold words. Not loudly, just enough to leave a crack. "She's your daughter," I whispered. Richard finally looked up. "I love her enough not to enable her bad choices." That sentence bothered me all day. Enable irresponsible. Richard always had a way of turning compassion into weakness. By afternoon, another memory from years ago kept playing in my head. I had needed dental work after cracking a tooth. Insurance only covered some of it, and Richard complained for weeks. "We need to prioritize," he'd said. Meanwhile, that same year, my husband somehow bought himself a brand new fishing boat. Back then, he justified it as an unbelievable deal. I used to accept excuses that make no sense to me anymore. The strange thing about waking up to manipulation is how your whole past starts rewriting itself. Moments I once ignored suddenly flash with warning signs. That evening, Richard left to meet some friends from church for dinner. I stayed home folding laundry while the same old thoughts circled endlessly in my mind. When I reached to pull one of Richard's shirts from the basket, something slipped out of the pocket. A folded deposit slip. I almost ignored it. Almost. But the bank logo instantly caught my eye. I frowned. It was not our bank. I picked it up, slowly. The deposit amount made my stomach drop. $8,400. I checked the account number. Nothing familiar. Then I saw the date. 3 days ago. My heart started hammering. Richard had put over $8,000 into an account I knew nothing about, all while claiming we could not afford legal help for our daughter. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table as my knees went weak. Maybe there was a simple explanation. That is what I tried to tell myself at first. There is always an explanation. But deep down, a different feeling had already taken hold. Fear. Not fear of losing money, but fear that my whole marriage was built on secrets I was never allowed to see. When Richard got home later that night, I watched him more closely than ever. The way he loosened his tie, the way he quietly hid his phone screen, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. For decades, I mistook that confidence for honesty. Now I was not sure anymore. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty and went downstairs for water. That is when I heard Richard speaking again, low and sharp, coming from the garage. I froze near the hallway. "I told you she does not know," he whispered angrily. Then, silence. "No, just keep things where they are for now." My hands started trembling instantly. Where they are? What things? I stepped closer before I could stop myself. Then I heard a name, Linda. Just one word, but it hit my chest like a stone because I recognized it. Not completely, not clearly, but enough to know Richard had mentioned her years ago, very casually, very briefly, too briefly. A cold feeling crept through my body. For the first time in nearly 40 years of marriage, I seriously wondered if my husband had another life I knew nothing about. After hearing that name on Richard's whispered call, I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal. That was the strangest part. I could discover something unsettling about my marriage and still find myself making coffee the next morning, like my world had not tilted sideways. I still watered my roses, still folded Richard's shirts, still smiled at neighbors walking their dogs, but inside me, something restless had woken up. I started paying attention, really paying attention. And once I did, I realized Richard had been hiding parts of himself for years. He grew tense whenever I entered his office unexpectedly. If I knocked, he answered too fast. If I lingered nearby, he found excuses to leave. One afternoon, I walked in with a basket of clean towels and caught him hurriedly stuffing papers into a drawer. He looked startled. "Did not hear you coming," he said, his voice way too casual. I glanced at the desk. "What are you working on? Taxes?" "It is September." He gave a tight smile. "You can never stay ahead enough with taxes." Then he stood up and took the basket from my hands, trying to physically steer me out of the room. A small thing, but suddenly everything mattered. That night, I sat reading in bed while Richard showered downstairs. Since ours was broken, he used the guest bathroom. His phone buzzed right beside me. Normally, I never touched his phone, never even considered it. But after nearly 40 years of marriage, suspicion changed my moral boundaries in ways I never expected. The screen lit up briefly. No message preview, just a name. Linda G. My heart nearly stopped. I stared at the screen as it continued vibrating softly against the wood. Then the screen went dark again. A minute later, Richard walked back in, drying his hair with a towel. I looked up calmly. "Your phone buzzed." He froze for a split second, then smiled. "Probably spam." Spam does not usually have first and last initials, but I kept quiet. That was my new survival strategy. Silence, observation, waiting. A few nights later, Richard had a church fundraising dinner downtown. Before leaving, he stood at the hallway mirror, adjusting his tie. "You staying up?" he asked. "Probably not. You should get some rest." He kissed my forehead, a routine gesture, totally mechanical. Then he grabbed his coat and left. The moment the garage door closed, the tension in my chest tightened. For the first time in our marriage, I had already decided to search his office. I stood outside the locked door for nearly a full minute before opening the hallway cabinet where Richard kept his spare keys. My hands shook so badly, I almost dropped the keys. Part of me still felt completely ridiculous. Maybe there was a harmless explanation for everything. Maybe Linda was just a client. Maybe the hidden account belonged to his work. Maybe I was turning into one of those paranoid wives from TV dramas. But deep down, I already knew something was terribly wrong. I slowly unlocked the office door. The room smelled of leather, paper, and Richard's cologne. Everything was painfully organized. Bookshelves perfectly lined. Pens sat neatly beside his computer. Filing cabinets labeled in his precise handwriting. Richard loved control. Now I saw it everywhere. I quietly approached the desk and opened the drawers one by one. Tax records, insurance forms, retirement statements. Nothing shocking, nothing out of the ordinary. And then I noticed the large filing cabinet against the wall. I had seen it thousands of times over the years, but now something felt completely off. Maybe because it stood just slightly farther from the wall than before. Or maybe because Richard was suddenly so obsessed with locking this room. I knelt beside it, and that was when I saw it. A small steel safe hidden behind the cabinet. I couldn't even breathe for a second. My stomach twisted so hard that I had to grab the desk just to stay upright. My husband had a secret safe, and somehow, after nearly 40 years of marriage, I had no idea it existed. I just stood there, staring down at it. It was small, but big enough for papers, money, jewelry, or secrets. Especially secrets. Gently, I reached down and touched the freezing metal with my trembling fingertips. A digital keypad. Just 4 simple numbers. I nearly laughed out loud, bitter and empty. Of course he would lock it. That box held the truth about our life, and I was completely locked out. At least, I thought I was. The next few days were absolute torture because I couldn't stop obsessing over it. That safe haunted me everywhere. At the grocery store, even while folding the laundry. Sitting in church, listening to the pastor talk about honesty, I kept staring at my husband next to me. I wondered how many lies a marriage could hold before it finally crumbled. Then, the breakthrough. A week later, Richard walked through the door after a church council meeting, smelling faintly of cheap whiskey. He wasn't drunk, just loose enough to be sloppy. He almost never drank, which made the whole thing feel incredibly off. Around midnight, I woke up to find his side of the mattress cold. Without a sound, I crept down the stairs. A sliver of light was shining from under his office door. I slipped down the hall and peered through the crack. And there he was. Richard was crouching by the safe, the cabinet pushed out of the way. He casually entered the code while quietly humming to himself. My chest throbbed so loudly, I was terrified he would hear me. The lock clicked. I craned my neck, straining to see his hands. He was too fast, but then he hesitated, just long enough. I froze. 0419. No, that couldn't be right. Then it clicked. April 19th. A birthday, but not mine. Not Megan's. Not Daniel's. Nobody in my family was born on April 19th. A wave of cold dread washed over me because I suddenly remembered where I had heard that date before. At a retirement dinner years ago, I remembered Richard joking about Linda Graves sharing her birthday with some famous baseball player. She had laughed so loudly, boasting that she was impossible to forget. I hadn't let that woman cross my mind in years, until this exact moment. He suddenly shut the safe door. I slipped backward into the shadows before he could catch me watching him. My hands were freezing as I rushed back upstairs. When he climbed back into bed 10 minutes later, I feigned sleep, but my mind was spinning out of control. Why would my own husband use another woman's birthday for his secret safe? Not our wedding anniversary, not his birthday, not mine, hers. It meant something. It had to. For the first time, a dark, terrifying thought took root. Maybe he wasn't just hiding cash. Maybe money wasn't the secret. Maybe he had been hiding an entire affair for years. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, while my husband slept peacefully right next to me. Only one thought kept repeating in my head. If that safe held a secret strong enough to redefine my husband's whole life, what was waiting inside? For 3 long days after finding the code, I did nothing. Externally, I acted perfectly normal. I still made dinner, still asked him if he wanted potatoes or rice. I even smiled on the phone when our son Daniel called. But inside my head, it was pure, deafening noise. Linda Graves. Her name replayed on a loop, like a song I couldn't stop. I tried to tell myself I was crazy, that maybe it was just an old crush. Maybe the date was meaningless. But deep down, a wife knows when something is wrong. And this felt rotten to the core. One afternoon, with Richard away at the golf course, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I stared at my laptop for 20 minutes before finally typing her name, Linda Graves. Hundreds of search results appeared. I nearly closed the window right then. Half of me didn't want to know. Suspicion hurts, but the truth can completely shatter you. Yet I kept scrolling. And then I found her. Linda Graves, Cincinnati, Ohio, 63 years old. My chest seized. Her photo showed an ordinary woman by a garden wearing jeans and a faded blue sweatshirt. Graying hair, a thin face, and tired eyes. She wasn't glamorous. She didn't seem like the type a man ruins his family for. Truthfully, she just looked lonely. I slowly clicked through her albums. No fancy vacations, no expensive designer jewelry. I saw no hints of a secret affair with my husband, only ordinary life. A little dog, garden photos, and church bake sales. Yet her birthday was the key to my husband's secret safe. I sat back, completely baffled. None of this matched the villain I had built up in my mind. But then I spotted something else. An old picture from 15 years ago at a company retirement dinner. My stomach bottomed out. Richard was standing right next to her, smiling. I zoomed in. His hand was resting gently on her back. Too familiar. Far too comfortable. Suddenly, I remembered that night. Richard had gone downtown for that office party while I stayed home with Megan after her appendix surgery. I remembered him mentioning her name afterward. She handles the accounting audits, he had told me casually. Just one forgettable line in 40 years of marriage. Yet here she was. Whispered secrets behind locked doors. I kept scrolling down her page. And then I noticed something even more bizarre. Linda's profile occasionally mentioned financial struggles, car trouble, medical bills, and working part-time well into her 60s. That didn't make sense either. If Richard was secretly funding this woman for years, why was she still struggling? Unless the money wasn't for romance at all. That thought chilled me even more. At dinner that night, I barely ate. Richard noticed immediately. "Are you okay?" "Just tired." He studied me across the table. "You've been distracted lately." I forced a weak laugh. "Maybe I'm just getting old." "You're not old." Funny how men say that while slowly making us feel invisible anyway. Richard kept eating while I watched him quietly. How many lies can you tell before you stop recognizing yourself? Or worse, before your own spouse stops recognizing you. Once he fell asleep that night, I crept back downstairs with my laptop. This time, I dug through public records, property deeds, business registrations, anything tied to Linda Graves. And then, there it was. A company name I knew instantly. Harrison Financial Consulting. Richard mentioned it years ago after retiring early from his corporate job. Just a small side consulting partnership. He claimed it barely brought in a dime. I clicked deeper. My heart raced as I found Linda Graves listed in old filings connected to the business. Not Richard. Her. I stared at the screen, completely baffled. Why was her name on corporate filings tied directly to my husband's financial work? Then an even more terrifying thought hit me. What if Richard was laundering or hiding money through her? It sounded completely insane, yet suddenly, every bizarre moment from the last 10 years started fitting together too perfectly. The secret bank account, the hidden safe, the hushed phone calls, his obsession with financial control. I slammed the laptop shut because my hands were shaking too hard to type. Right then, I heard heavy footsteps upstairs. Richard. I scrambled to close the browser as he walked into the kitchen, wearing pajama pants and looking half asleep. Are you coming to bed soon? His eyes darted to my laptop. What are you doing up? Oh, nothing. Just reading. For one terrifying second, I thought he knew. I thought he could read everything written all over my face. But he just nodded and walked over to the fridge. You worry too much lately, he said softly. Those words hit me like a physical blow, because that was always his move. Question something, and I was just being emotional. Spot a lie, and I was anxious. Feel hurt, and I was dramatic. Meanwhile, he was always calm, logical, reasonable. It is terrifying how easily you can control someone once you convince them their gut is wrong. The next morning, my daughter Megan called, sobbing. Tyler's lawyer had filed aggressive custody papers, and she sounded totally broken. I do not know how I am supposed to pay for this, she whispered. I sat parked outside the supermarket, squeezing the steering wheel as my daughter fell apart, and all I could picture was that hidden deposit slip for $8,400. Richard had no issue moving secret cash around while his daughter was drowning. Anger finally started replacing my confusion. Real anger, not fear, just pure anger. That afternoon, I did something I had not done in years. I drove to the bank branch on that slip, not to cause trouble, just to see it. The building sat in a quiet strip mall across town. Small, tucked away, nothing flashy. I parked across the street and watched it through my windshield. Richard had built a whole secret financial empire in places I never even knew existed. For the first time in my entire marriage, I felt completely humiliated. Not because of another woman or the money, but because I had trusted him. While they plotted their life behind locked doors, I drove home completely drained. Richard was already there, standing in the kitchen, sorting the mail. The moment he saw me, he flipped an envelope face down. Way too fast. There it was again, that split second of panic. I slowly walked to the counter. Anything important? No, he snapped back immediately. Way too fast. Then his phone buzzed, and he lunged for it like a reflex. I glimpsed the screen before he could hide it. Linda G. again. Richard slipped into the hallway to take it privately, leaving me alone in the kitchen with a terrifying realization. I was no longer afraid of the truth. I was afraid of how long I had ignored it. Because deep down, I was finally waking up. The worst betrayal was not the money or even the lies. It was realizing Richard spent years keeping me just dependent enough so I would never doubt him. And for the first time in almost 40 years, I was finally starting to question everything. A week after driving past that secret bank branch, Megan called me from a grocery store parking lot, sobbing so hard her words were barely coherent. "I got declined again," she whispered. "For what, the apartment?" I squeezed my eyes shut. "Oh, sweetheart. They checked my credit because Tyler stopped paying the joint cards. The landlord needs a co-signer." In the background, I heard little Liam asking if they were still having pizza tonight. That nearly shattered me. Megan lowered her voice. "I am trying, Mom. I really am." "I know you are." "No, you do not understand. I am exhausted." I squeezed the phone, sitting alone in my bedroom. "I worked a double shift yesterday. Liam had a fever all night. Then Tyler's lawyer sent more papers this morning." Her voice shook. "And Dad still thinks this is just some kind of lesson." Those words felt like a physical blow because deep down, she was right. Richard was not just refusing to help. He was judging her, punishing her, as if struggle only builds character when someone else is doing the suffering. "I will figure something out," I promised her quietly. "How?" I had no answer for her. After hanging up, I sat still for a long time, staring at the bedroom wall. Slowly, memories began to resurface, one after another. All those sacrifices. I remembered selling my grandmother's bracelet 15 years ago when Daniel broke his arm and our insurance didn't cover the bill. Richard insisted money was tight, so I quietly let it go without ever telling the kids. I remembered working secret holiday shifts at a flower shop one winter, just to buy Megan that college laptop. Richard called it a waste of money. I remembered clipping coupons while he lectured us about financial discipline. And all those years, he had been hiding money. The anger spreading through me now felt different, cleaner somehow, and far less confused. Betrayal is so much easier to understand once you stop defending the person who hurt you. That evening, Richard sat in his recliner watching the news, while I stood in the kitchen staring at the back of his head. Then I realized something strange. I wasn't intimidated by him anymore. For decades, his confidence controlled our entire home. If he frowned, we walked on eggshells. If he approved, we relaxed. But now, I saw a man terrified of losing control. "Did Megan call?" he asked, not turning around. "Yes." "How is she?" His casual tone made my blood run hot. "She was rejected for another apartment." Richard sighed heavily. "Well, these things take time." I stared in disbelief. "These things?" He finally muted the television and looked over his shoulder. "What do you want me to say, Carly?" "I want you to care." "That is unfair." "No," I whispered. "What is unfair is watching your daughter struggle while you treat compassion like a weakness." His face hardened. "There is a difference between helping and enabling." That word again, enabling. I slowly stepped closer. "Did anyone help you when you were young?" Richard frowned. "That is different." "Why?" "Because I worked for what I had." "Megan works constantly," I wanted to scream. Instead, I just crossed my arms. She is drowning, and bailing her out won't teach her stability. I stared at my husband, pausing before I spoke. You know what is strange? You always talk about money like there is never enough. His eyes narrowed slightly. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing. But something shifted in his face. A tiny, passing flicker of suspicion. For the first time, I realized he was sensing my distance too. That night, sleep never came. Around 2 a.m, I slipped downstairs, drinking water in the dark kitchen as moonlight stretched across the tile. I thought about my entire life, how carefully I had shrunk myself to fit Richard's comfort. I stopped spending, questioning, expecting. Without even realizing it, I had slowly become someone who apologized for needing anything. Once I understood that, another painful truth surfaced. Richard actually benefited from my insecurity. The next afternoon, while cleaning the hallway closet, I found an old plastic bin stuffed with ancient tax records. Normally, I would have ignored it. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the floor and began reading. Most of it was ordinary: mortgage statements, insurance renewals, medical receipts. Then I found an old tax form from 8 years ago. I almost missed it, a tiny investment entry for Harrison Financial Consulting, LLC. My heart raced. I frantically flipped through more files. Another reference popped up 2 years later, and then another. The investments weren't small either. Thousands of dollars. Yet Richard always claimed that consulting business was barely active. My breathing grew shallow as a horrifying realization hit me. Richard hadn't just hidden a little money. He had been building a secret fortune for decades. With trembling hands, I ran the documents through our old copier. I hid the pages in a cookbook box in the pantry, tucked behind old recipes. Hiding evidence against my own husband made me feel sick to my stomach. Later that evening, Daniel dropped by unexpectedly. He hugged Richard first. Of course he did. My son adored his dad. He always had. Richard taught him to drive, coached his baseball games, and helped him buy his first home. Meanwhile, I packed lunches and faded into the background. Now, Daniel sat at the counter eating leftover lasagna, venting about his job. Eventually, Megan's crisis came up. She's just being emotional, Richard said calmly. I nearly dropped my fork, but Daniel only nodded. Divorces are messy, Richard continued. She needs structure, not handouts. I looked at my son, waiting for him to object. He didn't. And suddenly, I saw how deeply Richard's mindset had shaped our family. Emotion was weakness. Need was irresponsibility. Control was wisdom. I excused myself early, slipping upstairs before either of them noticed the tears in my eyes. Up in our room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the family photos. 38 years of memories smiled back. Vacations, holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries. For the very first time, I asked myself a question I had been too terrified to face. Had Richard ever truly seen me as his equal? Or was I just the dependable wife who kept his life comfortable while he secretly protected his own interests? A few minutes later, his footsteps headed upstairs. He entered the room, loosening his tie. You were quiet tonight. I'm tired. He studied me, his eyes searching mine. You seem different lately. I looked straight at him, maybe more directly than I had in years. Or maybe I am finally paying attention. For a split second, Fear flickered across his face. It was tiny, but real. In that moment, I knew for sure that whatever Richard was hiding was big enough to make even him dread losing control. The night I finally opened Richard's safe, the rain beat so hard against the house that the windows rattled with every gust of wind. Richard had left an hour ago for a late church committee meeting downtown. He kissed my cheek before heading out, asking if I wanted him to grab takeout afterward. I almost laughed at how normal it all felt. Here I stood, staring at the man who had lied to me for years, while he worried about ordering chicken parmesan. "I'm fine," I had told him. "Don't stay up too late." He walked out carrying his umbrella like any ordinary husband on any normal night. The second his taillights faded down the street, the silence in the house grew heavy. Everything felt heavier, final somehow. I stood in the kitchen gripping the counter as my heart hammered violently against my ribs. Part of me wanted to stop. Once you uncover the truth, you can never go back to not knowing it. But the exhausted, humiliated, angry part of me needed answers more than comfort. I walked slowly toward Richard's office. Every step felt surreal. Hallway lights cast soft yellow shadows on the walls, while rain tapped steadily against the glass. I unlocked the office door quietly. I slid the filing cabinet aside, and there it was, the safe. Cold steel hidden behind decades of marriage. My hands shook as I knelt in front of it, the keypad beeping softly beneath my fingers. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, click. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I froze completely. Even knowing Richard was gone, guilt rushed through me. That is what happens when you spend years walking on eggshells around someone else's rules. Slowly, I pulled the safe door open and instantly knew my marriage was over. Stacks of cash sat inside, bundled neatly with paper bands. Not a few thousand, not emergency savings. A fortune. My stomach twisted. I reached out with trembling fingers. $50 bills with hundreds underneath. There had to be tens of thousands of dollars sitting right there, maybe more. All those years, Richard told me we had to pinch pennies. All those years, Megan struggled. All those years, I went without basic things because he claimed money was tight, while keeping a safe full of cash. I felt physically sick. But the money was not the worst part. Beneath the cash lay folders, bank statements, property deeds, and investment portfolios. I opened the first folder with care. The numbers blurred for a moment as my eyes welled with tears. Investment accounts, retirement funds, private transfers. Amounts so massive, I had to reread them to believe it. Richard had not just hidden savings. He had built a separate financial world, and I was never invited. My breathing turned shallow. I kept flipping pages. Some accounts were only in his name. Others, my heart stopped. Others listed Linda Graves right next to him. Joint ownership, joint financial authority. I stared at the papers in disbelief. No. This could not be happening. I sank back against the wall, trying to breathe through the sudden dizziness. For a horrifying second, I thought I might faint. Seeing proof changes you. Suspicion leaves room for denial, but paperwork does not. I forced myself to keep reading. One paper showed he owned a small rental condo in Cincinnati. Another showed bank transfers dating back nearly 11 years. 11 years. I covered my mouth in shock. Richard had been hiding money for over a decade, maybe longer. And through all those years, I never noticed. Suddenly, a memory slammed into me. Megan crying over student loans at our kitchen table, while Richard insisted we could not touch retirement funds. Meanwhile, he had hidden accounts worth hundreds of thousands. I felt a rage so sharp it terrified me. Not a loud, screaming anger, the kind that turns cold, dangerously cold. I kept searching through the folders mechanically. Then I found something else. Life insurance paperwork. The beneficiaries. My chest tightened painfully. Linda Graves. Not me. Her. I stopped breathing. My husband had named another woman his beneficiary, all while sleeping beside me every single night. I thought I was prepared for the betrayal by then. I was not. Tears spilled down my face before I could stop them. Not because of the money, but because suddenly, every single loving memory felt poisoned. Every anniversary dinner, every I love you, every forehead kiss before church. How many of those moments were real? Were any of them? The office suddenly felt suffocating. I stood up too fast, nearly knocking over his desk chair. My legs shook violently. I walked to the window to calm myself as rain streaked the glass outside. 38 years. 38 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and trust. All this time, Richard had quietly prepared for a future where I did not matter. The realization hollowed me out. But then, a new feeling crept up beneath the grief. Clarity. For the first time in months, everything finally made sense. Richard's obsession with controlling finances, his constant warnings about spending, the secrecy, those hushed phone calls, his distance whenever money came up. He was not protecting our future. He was protecting his own. I wiped my face and forced myself to think clearly. Tears would not help me now. I needed evidence. I grabbed my phone and began photographing everything. Every account number, every document, every transfer, every single signature linked to Linda. My hands steadied as I worked. Not because I was calm, but survival forces you to focus. Then, I found a sealed envelope tucked under the folders. I hesitated before sliding it out. Inside was a handwritten note. Not romantic, not emotional, just cold and practical. It outlined instructions, transfer schedules, accounts, and backup plans. But one line near the bottom made my blood freeze. In case suspicious, delay any major movement until after retirement is finalized. I read those words 3 times, then a 4th. My husband had actually written out a backup plan for when I finally caught him. I sank slowly into Richard's desk chair, staring at those words, while something inside me shattered completely. Not my heart, my illusion. The man I thought I married was gone. Maybe he never existed at all. I lost track of time sitting there until thunder cracked outside. That sound jolted me back. Richard could walk through the door at any second. Hurriedly, I slipped every document right back to where I found it. Every folder, every bundle of cash, every paper went back perfectly aligned. Then I shut the safe. The heavy click sounded different this time. No longer a mystery, just final. I carefully rolled the filing cabinet back into place and stood in the center of his office, looking around. Nothing looked different. And yet everything had changed because now I knew the truth. My husband had not just hidden some money. He had built an escape plan, one that very clearly did not include me. When Richard finally came home later that night, carrying takeout and smiling, I stood in the kitchen watching him shed his wet coat. "Are you still awake?" he asked warmly. I nodded slowly. Just could not sleep. He walked over, kissed my cheek, and said he brought my favorite soup. Looking directly into his eyes for the first time in weeks, I suddenly realized something terrifying. Richard genuinely believed he was smarter than me. That arrogance had protected him for years, but now it was going to destroy him. For 2 days after opening that safe, I barely spoke a word to him unless I absolutely had to. Not because I wanted to punish him. I was just terrified that if I looked at him for too long, I would scream out something I could never take back. It is strange how quickly deep grief turns into total numbness. I still brewed coffee every single morning, still folded laundry, still listened to him ramble about grocery prices, neighborhood news, and the weather, as if our entire marriage was not rotting right beneath us. Meanwhile, inside my head, numbers kept flashing without stopping. Account balances, transfer records, property deeds, and Linda Graves listed as the beneficiary. Every time I remembered her name, my chest tightened painfully. One evening at dinner, Richard reached across the table and lightly touched my hand. "You seem distant lately." I stared at his fingers resting on mine. Those exact hands had signed secret financial papers behind my back for decades. "I am just tired," I replied softly. "You have been saying that a lot lately," he noted. I looked up. Maybe I am finally just exhausted. Something flickered across his face. Maybe concern, maybe suspicion. Frankly, it did not matter anymore. That night, once Richard was asleep, I locked myself in the guest bathroom and just stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked so much older than I remembered. Not physically, but deep down. Like a woman who had spent decades apologizing just for taking up space. And for the very first time, I forced myself to ask a terrifying question. What would actually happen if I left? At 62 years old, the thought of divorce did not feel like freedom. It felt like standing at the absolute edge of a cliff. I had not worked a real job in decades. Richard controlled every single penny. Our home, the retirement funds, all the investments. Until a few weeks ago, I had no clue where our money even was. A wave of cold fear washed over me. Maybe that is why women choose to stay. Not because the betrayal does not hurt, but because rebuilding everything this late in life feels completely impossible. The next morning, I quietly searched for divorce attorneys. While Richard showered, my shaking fingers typed out the words: "Experienced family lawyer, Columbus, Ohio." I scrolled through profiles until one specific name stopped me. Patricia Bennett, a family law specialist with 28 years of experience. She handled asset concealment cases. Reading that phrase made my pulse race. Asset concealment. That was exactly what Richard was doing. This was not a misunderstanding or simple financial caution. It was concealment. I stared at her screen for a long time before I finally dialed the number. A calm voice answered, "Bennett Family Law." I almost hung up. Instead, I whispered, I would like to schedule a consultation. 3 days later, I lied and told Richard I was heading out for lunch. Well, technically, it was not a complete lie. I did plan to see Megan afterward, but first, I drove downtown to Patricia's office with copies of all those documents hidden in a manila envelope under my passenger seat. Her office sat on the 3rd floor of a quiet brick building overlooking the river. Inside, everything smelled of coffee and expensive stationery. I almost turned around twice. Then the receptionist called my name. Mrs. Holmes. Patricia Bennett looked to be somewhere in her late 50s. She wore a sharp navy suit, had a silver blonde bob, and calm eyes that noticed everything. She shook my hand firmly, saying, "Come in." The moment her door shut behind me, I broke down crying. It was not loud, dramatic sobbing, just silent tears I no longer had the strength to hold back. Patricia simply handed me a tissue and let me cry. "You are safe here," she said quietly. Hearing those words almost shattered whatever strength I had left. Safe. I could not remember the last time I had felt truly safe. After a few minutes, I opened the envelope and slid those copied pages across her desk. Patricia began reading in silence. The longer she read, the more serious her expression became. Finally, she looked up. "How long have you known about these accounts?" "A few weeks," I said. "And did your husband control all the finances?" "Yes." "Did I know these assets existed?" "No." Patricia leaned back slowly in her chair. "Mrs. Holmes, this is incredibly significant." My stomach tightened instantly. "What does that mean?" "It means your husband has intentionally hidden marital assets." Hearing those words out loud felt completely surreal. I stared down at my hands, hoping I had just misunderstood something. "You didn't." Her cold certainty both comforted and terrified me as she tapped a paper. "These transfers to Linda Graves are very concerning." "You think he is having an affair?" She paused thoughtfully. "Possibly. But financially, that's less important than what these records suggest." "What do they suggest?" "That your husband has spent years positioning money outside your awareness." The room suddenly felt ice cold. Years. Not mistakes. Years. Patricia continued reading quietly as I tried not to break down. Then she asked softly, "Are you afraid of divorcing him?" I answered too quickly. "Yes," she nodded gently. "That's normal. I'm 62 years old. That doesn't mean your life is over." Easy for her to say, I thought. She had confidence, a career, independence. Meanwhile, I had spent decades shrinking inside my own marriage. Sensing my thoughts, Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Carly, can I ask you something difficult?" I nodded weakly. "Are you afraid of losing your husband?" My mouth opened automatically. Then I stopped, because suddenly I wasn't sure anymore. Patricia's voice softened. "Or are you afraid of finally seeing him clearly?" That question hit me harder than finding the safe. Deep down, I already knew the truth. I wasn't grieving the man sitting at my kitchen table every night. I was mourning the man I thought existed for nearly 40 years. And those are two completely different things. Tears welled up instantly. Patricia let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. "You must protect yourself carefully from this point forward." "What do I do?" "First, keep gathering copies quietly." I nodded. "Second, Do not confront him yet. That shocked me. Why? Because once they realize you know about hidden assets, they quickly move the money. An immediate chill ran through me. Of course, Richard would. Patricia continued calmly. You need documentation before emotion. Documentation before emotion. Those words felt strangely powerful. For decades, Richard dismissed my feelings as weaknesses. Now, someone was telling me clarity mattered more. Patricia handed back the folder. I also strongly recommend opening a private bank account in your own name immediately. The idea felt completely rebellious. My own bank account at 62 years old. It should have felt ordinary, but instead, it felt revolutionary. Before I left, Patricia studied me quietly one last time. You've spent a long time underestimating yourself, haven't you? I swallowed hard. I think my husband spent a long time encouraging that. Patricia nodded slowly. That happens more often than you would imagine. Walking back to my car afterward, the autumn breeze felt sharper somehow. It was colder, but cleaner too. For the first time since uncovering Richard's lies, I stopped feeling crazy. I wasn't imagining things or overreacting. Most importantly, I wasn't powerless. That realization terrified me as much as it empowered me. I finally understood the truth. Richard had spent years quietly preparing for life without me. He just never expected me to start preparing for a life without him first. Richard planned our anniversary dinner 3 weeks after I met Patricia. 38 years of marriage. That's what he proudly boasted when reserving the table. 38 years. As if longevity meant loyalty. We ate at the same upscale steakhouse we had visited almost every anniversary since our 40s. Dark wood walls, soft piano music, and waiters in black vests who called my husband Sir with immediate respect. To anyone watching, we probably looked like the perfect older couple. Richard wore a charcoal blazer, smiling warmly at everyone we passed. I sat beside him feeling like I was attending the funeral of my own marriage. You look beautiful tonight, he said, as the waiter poured wine. I nearly flinched at the compliment, not because it felt fake, but because he actually sounded entirely sincere. That was the terrifying part. We expect betrayal to look cruel and obvious, yet he still held doors, paid compliments, and remembered exactly how I liked my steak. Manipulation wrapped in kindness is almost impossible to explain to anyone else. Thank you, I said softly. Richard smiled. To 38 years, he raised his glass. I raised mine too, but internally another thought screamed. To 38 years of not knowing who you really are. Dinner remained painfully normal at first. Richard talked about church fundraisers and Daniel's promotion at work, while I nodded politely at the right moments. Midway through dinner, he suddenly reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I've been thinking lately, he whispered, how lucky we are compared to most couples. I just stared at him. Lucky? That word almost made me laugh. Instead, I asked quietly, why do you say that? Because we survived everything. He smiled warmly. Most marriages don't last anymore. I studied his face as the soft candlelight flickered across his features. Did he believe his own lies, or had deception just become second nature? He kept chatting casually. People give up too easily. Marriage takes real commitment. Honesty. Loyalty. The word honesty nearly choked me. I stared down at my glass, terrified my expression would give me away. Across from me sat a man secretly funneling cash into hidden accounts, lecturing me on loyalty over a filet mignon. The hypocrisy was sickening. "You okay?" Richard asked. "Yes. You seem distracted again." "I'm listening." "No, you were somewhere else lately." His tone was light, but the suspicion underneath was obvious. Richard was noticing the drift between us. That realization meant I had to be careful, starting right then. Patricia warned me not to confront him yet, so I offered a faint smile. "I have just been worried about Megan." Richard sighed softly, clearly annoyed. "She is going to be fine. She is struggling. She is emotional." There it was again, his favorite way of dismissing pain. "She is raising a child alone," I said quietly, "and she will become stronger because of it." I stared at him in utter disbelief. "You really think suffering builds character, don't you?" Richard frowned. "That is not what I said, but it is what you mean." For a second, thick tension hung between us. Then he leaned back calmly. "You have changed lately, Carly." His words hung heavy in the air. I lifted my water glass slowly. "Maybe I am just tired of pretending everything is fine." His face hardened instantly. What is that supposed to mean? I almost told him the truth. Almost. Instead, I forced a tight smile. "It just means getting older makes people more reflective." That eased his mind a bit. Suddenly, the truth hit me. He still thought he controlled the entire situation. Control me. Knowing that gave me power. After dinner, he insisted on ordering dessert, even though we were both full. Then he slid a small velvet jewelry box across the table. "Happy anniversary." I opened it slowly. Inside lay a delicate gold bracelet, beautiful, simple, and absolutely devastating. Years ago, a gesture like this would have brought happy tears to my eyes. Now, I only thought about the hidden safe, those secret bank accounts, and the life insurance policy naming another woman. I looked up, keeping my voice steady. "It is lovely." Richard smiled with clear satisfaction. "I saw it last month and thought of you." Those words cut deeper than they should have. Once, I would have believed him without hesitation. Maybe a part of him actually did think of me. Maybe that is why betrayal hurts so deeply. People can love you and still stab you in the back. Both can be true. On our way back, rain streaked across the glass while soft jazz hummed from the speakers. Richard kept one hand draped casually over the steering wheel. "Do you remember our 10th anniversary?" he asked suddenly. I swallowed. Yes, we could barely afford to eat out back then. The irony was suffocating. Barely afford. All this time, he had wrapped our marriage in the myth of our financial struggles, and I carried that weight with him, loyal to the end. "We made it work," he said proudly. I stared out at the dark road so he would not see my rage. "No, Richard, I was the one who made it work. I sacrificed. I compromised. I shrank my life while you quietly planned your exit." By the time we pulled into the driveway, I was drained. He loosened his necktie and walked into the kitchen. "I am going to check something in the study real quick," he said. My heart raced. He was probably checking the safe, checking his secret accounts. I forced myself to stay calm. Okay. I stood frozen in the hallway as he walked away. Moments later, I heard the metal filing cabinet drag softly against the floor. Then, nothing but silence. I held my breath. When he finally came out a few minutes later, he looked relaxed, content, He had not realized anything was gone. Good. Perfect. Later that night, once he drifted off, I slipped out of bed and crept downstairs, gripping my phone tight. Patricia told me to keep gathering proof, recording everything meticulously. Over the past 2 weeks, I had built a secret online folder packed with screenshots, bank records, real estate deeds, and wire history. Now, I uploaded pictures of my new gold bracelet. The gift felt symbolic, a cheap trinket for the loyal wife who sacrificed everything while hundreds of thousands stayed hidden away. I sat in the pitch-black living room, my face illuminated only by the cold blue light of my screen. Then a terrifying thought struck me. What if he was already shifting the funds? Panic squeezed my chest. Patricia had warned me this very thing might happen. I pulled up the copied bank statements, scanning the dates. That was when I saw it. A massive transfer went through just 4 days ago. It was a massive sum. I zoomed in. The money went straight to Linda Graves. My breath caught in my throat. He was not stopping. Even while taking me out, buying me jewelry, and whispering about our life together, he was still draining our assets. That discovery broke something inside me forever. Deep down, I think I still hoped he felt at least some guilt. Maybe he regretted his choices. Maybe a tiny piece of the honest man I married was still buried inside him. But this was active, deliberate betrayal, happening right now. Sitting alone in the dark house we built, everything finally became crystal clear. My husband was not trying to save our marriage. He was preparing to leave me behind. He just had no idea I was already planning my own escape. I headed to Cincinnati on a bleak Thursday morning without telling a soul. Not my husband, not Megan, not even Patricia. I knew it was incredibly reckless, but I simply did not care anymore. After weeks of staring at spreadsheets and secret assets, I needed to see Linda Graves with my own eyes. I needed to make her real, instead of just a ghost haunting my marriage. The drive took almost 2 hours. Dark storm clouds hovered over the highway, while quiet country tunes played in the background. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly the entire way. I kept dreaming up different versions of her. Some glamorous older woman living comfortably off my husband's money. A scheming liar. A secret mistress waiting quietly in another city. But deep down, those cold documents told me the story was far more complicated. The address from the deeds led me to a worn-out neighborhood of faded duplexes and cramped porches. No sign of wealth or luxury, just ordinary, working-class exhaustion. I parked across the street, staring at the small, pale green house in Linda's name. My stomach did a violent flip. I nearly drove off twice. What was I even doing there? But then I remembered Megan crying over apartment rejections, while Richard quietly funneled cash away. That memory hardened my resolve all over again. I stepped out of the car. The porch steps groaned beneath my feet as I walked up and knocked. For a few agonizing seconds, there was only silence. Slow footsteps approached from inside. The door opened halfway, and suddenly, everything shifted. Linda Graves did not look like a woman who would steal someone's husband. She looked exhausted, painfully tired. Thin shoulders, a faded sweatshirt, and messy gray hair. Heavy dark circles hung under her eyes, beyond the help of any makeup. She just stared at me. "Yes?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "Are you Linda Graves?" Her face tightened instantly. "Yes," she said. My name is Carly Holmes. All the color drained from her face. It wasn't guilt. It was raw, genuine fear. She squeezed the doorframe. "Oh, God," she breathed. Her panic threw me off completely, ruining my mental script. "You know who I am?" She shut her eyes tight, bracing herself for a blow. "Yes." The silence between us stretched painfully. Finally, she stepped back and murmured, "You should come inside." That was not the reaction I had braced for. Her small home smelled of coffee and old paper. Nothing looked expensive. Her furniture was worn but well kept. There were zero signs of hidden wealth. She waved awkwardly toward the sofa. "Can I make you some coffee?" "No, thank you." She nodded nervously and sank into an armchair. A heavy silence settled between us. Then I finally spat out the question that had been rotting in my mind for weeks. "How long have you been seeing my husband?" She stared at me, completely blank. "Involved?" "You know exactly what I mean." Her eyes went wide. "No, Carly, please. It is not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "Your birthday opens his safe." She looked genuinely lost. Then a wave of pain washed over her. "Oh, God," she whispered, covering her mouth. "He used that?" I stared. "You had no idea." "No." Her utter bewilderment sounded entirely real. Too real. I leaned in. "Richard has secret accounts, properties, and insurance policies all registered in your name." Her face crumbled, and to my absolute shock, her eyes welled up with heavy tears. "I told him this would catch up to us," she sobbed. I froze. "What are you talking about?" She stared down at her lap. For a moment, she choked back words. Then she whispered, "Richard never loved me." That hit me like a physical blow. It was nothing like I had imagined. "What?" She looked up, completely drained. "He just used me." I stared at her, totally stunned. "What do you mean by that?" She got up and hurried to a small desk, pulled open a drawer, and came back clutching a stack of files. My stomach clenched. More documents. She sat down heavily. "I should have confessed years ago." "Confess to what?" Her fingers shook against the folders. Once Richard retired from his corporate accounting job, he began shifting funds through consulting accounts. He claimed he needed privacy because he did not trust changing investment laws. I knit my brows. "That still does not explain why your name is all over this." She swallowed hard. "Because the company was registered to me." The walls felt like they were closing in. "What?" "I signed papers for him years ago." "Why would you ever do that?" She let out a bitter, tearful laugh. "Because I was a fool." A quiet pause. "My husband passed away 12 years ago, and I was drowning in debt. Richard promised to help me make some extra cash if I handled the basic paperwork for his consulting business." My heart hammered against my ribs. "So you are saying this was not an affair?" She shook her head. "No? Then why hide it all?" "Because what he was doing was highly illegal." Those words dropped like lead in my chest. I stared at her as my whole world spun on its axis again. She wiped her damp eyes. "At first, I thought it was completely harmless. He said we needed separate tax accounts, but that was a lie." "Right. Exactly how much money are we talking about?" She looked physically ill. "I honestly have no idea anymore." I leaned back, my mind reeling. Richard was not funding a secret mistress. He was building an entire shadow life using Linda, using me, using everyone. Did he ever plan to walk away from me? I whispered. She paused a second too long. That told me everything. A wave of fresh humiliation washed over me. Finally, she broke the silence. He used to talk about wanting total freedom once he retired. Freedom. A simple word, but it absolutely shattered me. Freedom from what? From me? No, from accountability. From the 40-year marriage I had sacrificed everything to protect. She looked at me with deep, sincere pity. I am so sorry, Carly. I let out a soft laugh, not out of humor, but sheer absurdity. For weeks I had painted her as my mortal enemy, but looking at her now, she was just another woman, used and broken by the same monster. He made me feel completely insane, I confessed softly. Linda nodded right away. He is so good at sounding reasonable. Those words chilled me, because they described Richard perfectly. Not explosive, not reckless, just controlled, measured, and dangerously convincing. Linda slowly opened another folder, saying there was more to see. Inside were copies of more transfers, business filings, and handwritten notes from Richard. One single line made my stomach drop instantly. Move remaining assets gradually before final retirement separation. I looked up sharply. Retirement separation. Linda looked completely devastated. I think he planned to leave eventually, she said. My vision blurred instantly. Not because I wanted him, but because our entire marriage suddenly felt staged. Like I was playing wife while he quietly designed an exit strategy. Linda's voice shook. I should have stopped helping him a long time ago. Why didn't you? She looked down. By the time I understood what he was really doing, I was already trapped in it too. I sat there in silence as rain tapped softly against the glass. Two older women, both exhausted, both manipulated differently by the exact same man. And for the first time since I found that safe, I understood everything clearly. This was never about romance. It was about control, money, and escape. And Richard had spent years carefully arranging all three behind my back. I barely even remember my drive home from Cincinnati. The entire highway blurred past, while Linda's words replayed endlessly in my head. He planned to leave eventually. Every time I thought about it, another memory cracked open. Richard insisting separate finances were smart. Richard discouraging me from ever returning to work full-time. Richard quietly controlling every major decision in our marriage, always making it sound practical instead of selfish. By the time I pulled into our driveway, darkness had fallen. His car sat in the garage. For a long moment, I sat frozen behind the wheel, staring at the warm kitchen light through the window. Our house suddenly felt unfamiliar to me, not because the furniture had changed, but because I had. I walked inside with Linda's documents hidden in my tote bag. Richard stood at the counter making coffee. "Hey," he said casually. "You were gone a while." "I visited Megan." Another partial lie. "How is she doing?" "Tired." Richard nodded sympathetically, pouring cream into his mug. His performance almost impressed me now. How could someone lie so calmly for so long? "You want coffee?" he asked. "No." He glanced at me carefully. "You sure you are okay?" For one dangerous second, I almost answered honestly. No, Richard, I am not okay. I know about your hidden accounts. I know about the fake business transfers. I know you spent years planning an exit from our marriage while pretending we had a future together. But instead, I just said, long day. Richard accepted the answer instantly. That hurt too, because after 38 years together, he still did not really see me. Not deeply, not honestly. That night, I waited until he fell asleep before sneaking Linda's documents into the guest bathroom and locking the door. I carefully spread every page across the floor tiles. Business filings, transfers, tax records, and his handwritten notes. The more I studied them, the clearer the pattern became. Richard had not simply hidden our money. He had slowly moved assets away from our marriage over time, quietly, strategically, patiently. The realization made me physically nauseous, because this was not panic or desperation. This was pure planning. I photographed everything and emailed copies to a private account Patricia helped me set up. Then I noticed something else buried inside the paperwork. A retirement projection worksheet. My pulse quickened instantly. Near the bottom of the page, Richard had handwritten notes calculating estimated post-separation liquidity. Post-separation. Not if separation happened, but when. The distinction shattered me emotionally. I sat on the bathroom floor, staring at those words as tears slid silently down my face. All those years, I truly thought we were growing old together. Meanwhile, Richard had apparently spent retirement preparing to become financially untouchable without me. I suddenly remembered a conversation from 3 years ago. We were sitting on our back porch drinking iced tea when I casually mentioned downsizing eventually after retirement. Richard had smiled strangely, saying, maybe one day we would both want different things. Back then, I thought he meant hobbies or travel. Now I understood. He had already been imagining life without me. The next morning, I met Patricia again. This time, I was not trembling. I was furious. Real anger changes your posture somehow, and Patricia noticed immediately. You found more. I handed her the folder. She reviewed the documents silently while I watched the city traffic crawl beyond her office window. Finally, she exhaled slowly. This is worse than I initially thought. My stomach tightened. How bad? Your husband appears to have intentionally structured hidden assets over many years. Hearing it phrased so clinically made everything feel even colder. Patricia continued carefully. These handwritten calculations strongly suggest premeditation. I stared down at my hands. He planned this. Yes. The confirmation hurt more than I expected. Not because I doubted it, but because part of me still wanted someone to say, I misunderstood everything. But there was no misunderstanding left. Patricia tapped another page. This also explains why he maintained financial control so aggressively. I looked up. What do you mean? Carly, men who conceal assets long-term often discourage financial independence in their spouses. It reduces scrutiny. Those words hit me like ice water. Reduces scrutiny. Suddenly, my entire marriage sounded like a cold case study instead of a relationship. I leaned back. He always made me feel irresponsible with money. Patricia nodded knowingly. That is common, she said. Common. I hated that word. It meant women like me existed everywhere, slowly disappearing inside marriages built on control, disguised as protection. I swallowed hard. Did he ever love me? Patricia paused carefully, then said, I cannot answer that, but someone can love you and still put themselves above your well-being. The heavy truth of that settled between us. Before I left, Patricia asked quietly if I had decided what to do. The answer came easier than I expected. Yes. Not because I felt fearless, but because I finally understood something. Richard had emotionally left years ago. I was just the last person to find out. That afternoon, I dropped in on Megan. She looked exhausted opening the door, while Liam colored superheroes at the kitchen table. Are you okay? She asked immediately. I almost laughed. Apparently, my face could not hide my emotions anymore. I just wanted to see you. Megan studied me while making coffee. Are you and Dad fighting? No. That answer was technically true. Fighting requires honesty, and we were far beyond that. Later, while Liam watched cartoons, Megan sat beside me quietly on the couch. Then she said something that stunned me. You know, growing up, I always thought Dad treated you more like an employee than a wife. I whipped my head toward her. What? She shrugged uncomfortably, saying, I do not know how to explain it. Try, I said. Megan hesitated. He respected you, but everything revolved around his decisions, his money, his rules. Her simple observation took my breath away. Children see the things adults spend years denying. I used to hate how careful you became around him, she admitted softly. I stared at her. Careful, as if you were trying not to upset him. Fresh shame washed over me, not because she judged me, but because she was right. I had spent years managing Richard's moods without even realizing it. Megan touched my hand gently. Mom, are you happy? Her question broke something open inside me. Honestly, I did not know anymore. Had I been happy or just stable? There is a painful difference. When I got home that evening, I found Richard in his office reviewing paperwork. The sight did not intimidate me anymore. I saw him clearly. A man building escape routes, while I tried to build a family around him. Richard looked up as I entered. Everything okay? I looked straight at him. Yes. And for the first time in decades, I was not lying to protect his comfort anymore. Deep down, a quiet decision had already begun to form inside me. Richard Holmes had spent years planning his future in secret. Now it was my turn. The morning I signed the divorce papers, the Columbus sky looked painfully beautiful, bright blue with cold autumn sunlight. The kind of peaceful morning that makes betrayal feel even crueler. I sat in Patricia Bennett's office, holding a pen that suddenly felt heavier than anything I had ever held. 38 years. That is how long my marriage lasted. Long enough to raise kids, build traditions, and completely lose myself without even noticing. Patricia carefully slid the final document toward me. You do not have to rush, she said. I looked down at his name typed neatly across the top. Richard Allen Holmes. For a second, memories flooded my mind. Our wedding day, our first apartment, the night Daniel was born, Richard teaching Megan how to ride a bike, Christmas mornings, hospital visits, vacations, ordinary Tuesdays. A whole lifetime compressed into one unbearable second. Then, another memory pushed through. Hidden bank accounts, secret transfers, post-separation liquidity, Linda's exhausted face, Megan crying in parking lots while Richard hid our money. Slowly, I signed my name. Carly Holmes. The moment the pen left the page, something unexpected happened. I did not feel destroyed. I felt calm. Not happy, not relieved exactly, but clear. It was like years of emotional fog had finally lifted. Patricia gathered the paperwork. "You are doing the right thing," she said. I laughed softly. A month ago, that would have terrified me. What changed? I thought about it, then said, "I realized I have been alone in this marriage for years already." Patricia nodded quietly. Before I walked out, she asked me one last question. "How do you want him served?" I looked out the office window. Outside, people walked through downtown with coffee cups, unaware my entire life had just changed. Then I heard myself say, "I know exactly where I want him to find these papers." That evening, Richard came home unusually cheerful. "There's a church fundraiser next weekend," he said, loosening his tie. "Harold Simmons wants us both there." Harold, Richard's old friend from his corporate accounting days. The same Harold who once joked that Richard could hide money from the IRS if he wanted to. Back then, we all laughed. Now that memory made my stomach turn. "I am not feeling social lately," I answered quietly. Richard watched me while pouring his bourbon. "You have withdrawn from everyone," he said. "Maybe because I finally see you." Instead, I just shrugged. He stepped closer. Did I do something wrong? His question almost broke me. Not because it sounded sincere, but because he genuinely seemed confused. That is the terrifying thing about people like him. If their betrayal unfolds slowly enough, they stop recognizing it. They call it strategy, protection, preparation. Meanwhile, everyone else bleeds quietly around them. "I am just tired," I answered again. Richard sighed softly. "You keep saying that," he muttered, "because you keep giving me reasons to be exhausted." He kissed my forehead and went upstairs to shower. The moment the bathroom door closed, I moved fast, precise, and calm. Not because I did not care, but because my emotions had burned out weeks ago. I slipped into his office, cracked the safe, and slid the divorce papers right on top of the folders. He couldn't possibly miss them when he opened it. For once, my hands didn't shake. No panic, just cold clarity. Then, I left him a short, handwritten note. I stared at the blank sheet for a long moment before putting pen to paper. "I knew before you thought I did." Simple, cold, true. I set it right over the files and slowly backed away, staring into the dark safe for a few quiet seconds. The secret cache, the hidden accounts, decades of betrayal. I gently shut the door. It closed with a heavy click. It sounded so final. I slid the cabinet back into place, heading upstairs just as he walked out of the bathroom. "You okay?" he asked casually, drying his hair. "Yes," I said. And strangely enough, I actually was. That night, I slept more deeply than I had in months. The pain was there, but the agonizing weight was over. He left early for breakfast with Harold, then church business. I spent those hours wiping down the kitchen, my stomach tied in tight, anxious knots the entire time. Any second now. Soon he would open that door, and the illusion would shatter. Right around noon, my phone buzzed. Patricia called. "Is everything ready?" "Yes," I answered. "Are you sure about this?" I stared down the hall toward his office. He locked his real life in there, so he can find the truth there, too. After we hung up, I sat in the silent house, listening to the grandfather clock measure out the minutes. Every little noise echoed in the quiet. Time crawled. Finally, around 3 in the afternoon, his tires crunched on the gravel outside. My heart raced instantly. The front door creaked open. "Carly?" "In here," I called out. He walked in, holding his church papers, looking entirely normal. He had no clue his whole world was about to shatter. "How was your meeting?" I asked softly. "Long," he replied, loosening his collar. "I need to grab something from the office." Here it was, the moment. "Okay," I whispered, nodding. He walked down the hall, and a second later, I heard his door open. Then came a heavy, suffocating silence. My chest felt so tight I could barely breathe. Then, the heavy scrape of the cabinet. Another dead pause. Then, "What the hell?" His voice sent a chill straight down my spine. Not because he was angry, but because he sounded scared. I sat perfectly still, frozen in place. Moments later, his heavy boots pounded down the hall. He burst in, holding the divorce papers and my crumpled note, his face completely bloodless. "What is this?" he demanded. I just looked up at him. "You already know," I said. He stared at me, completely stunned. "How did you open the safe?" The sheer absurdity almost made me laugh. No questions about us or why I was leaving, just his safe. "I watched you," I said. His breath hitched. "You went through my private files." "Private," I whispered back. "You hid our money for years." He froze. For once, there was no smooth excuse, no clever spin, no polished logic to save him. Just dead silence. "You don't understand what you saw," he stammered. I slowly stood to face him. "Actually, Richard, I finally do." His face twisted from fear to rage. "You had no right," he snapped. "No right?" I cut him off. "I spent 38 years believing we were struggling while you built secret accounts behind my back. It is not what you think." "Then explain Linda Graves," I demanded. He flinched at her name, looking away instantly. In that moment, I saw his guilt and his shock that I had actually found the strength to face him. He stared at me like I was a complete stranger. Not his wife, not the mother of his children. Just a ghost. The divorce papers shook in his grip, while my note lay crushed inside his fist. "I can explain this," he muttered. Years ago, those words would have broken me. Not today. I crossed my arms and waited. "Go ahead." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, his silver tongue failed him. And then came the anger. Not a loud scream, but that cold, calculated rage he used whenever he felt trapped. "You had no right touching my things," he sneered. I nearly laughed. "So that is your defense? You invaded my privacy." Privacy. My voice finally cut through the air like a knife. "You hid hundreds of thousands of dollars from me." His jaw clenched. "You simply don't understand money," he said. And there it was, the same condescending line he used for decades. But it didn't work anymore. "I understand perfectly," I replied. "No, Carly, you are being emotional," he insisted. That word felt like throwing fuel on a spark. Emotional. As if cold calculations justified his betrayal, and my pain was meaningless because I actually felt it. "You built a whole future without me," I whispered. He rubbed his temples hard. "That is not true. You wrote down post-separation liquidity in your own handwriting, Richard." His face drained of color. For once, real terror flashed in his eyes as the depth of my knowledge sank in. "Did you copy my files?" he asked slowly. "Yes," I said. "How many?" "Every single one." The silence was deafening. Suddenly, his knees seemed to give out, and he sank heavily into an armchair, completely defeated. I watched him from across the room. In nearly 40 years, I had never seen my husband lose his grip on a situation. "You spoke to someone," he muttered. "A lawyer." He closed his eyes. He was smart. He always figured out the math quickly. "That attorney is using you." I stared at him incredulous. "You used me for 38 years. That is ridiculous." "Is it?" I challenged. He stood up suddenly. "I did it to protect this family," he insisted. "No," I snapped. "You did it to protect yourself." His face turned to stone. "You have no idea what pressure feels like," he said. "Pressure." I laughed bitterly. "Megan begged you for help while you hid money in a safe." "That is completely unrelated." "It is exactly related." He pointed toward the office. "That money was carefully managed retirement planning." "For who?" I asked quietly. "You and Linda." Just hearing her name changed everything. He looked away too quickly, and in that split second, I realized something. Maybe Linda wasn't his lover, but she was the only one who truly knew him. That betrayal cut deep. "You trusted her more than me," I whispered. He looked frustrated now. "You're twisting things." "Am I?" "She was helping manage business structures. You made her beneficiary on insurance policies." He froze. Another silent truth he couldn't explain. "You went through everything," he muttered. "Yes." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, finally, he whispered, "You were never supposed to find it like this." Those words nearly shattered me. Not because they sounded loving, but because they confirmed my worst fear. There was always a plan. I just wasn't in it. "What exactly was your end game, Richard?" He rubbed both hands over his face. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "That is not an answer." "I needed security." "You had security. You had a wife." "That is not the same." The raw honesty of that statement stunned us both. He realized it the second it slipped out, but it was too late. A cold weight settled inside me. After weeks of chasing lies, I finally had the truth. I was never his partner. I was just part of the life he managed while building a secret one. Suddenly, the front door opened downstairs. We both froze. Then our son Daniel's voice echoed through the hallway. "Mom? Dad?" Perfect timing. He immediately straightened his posture, instinctively rebuilding his composure like a politician before a speech. But underneath, I could still see the panic. Daniel walked in carrying takeout boxes, stopping dead in his tracks when he saw the documents in his father's hand. "What's going on?" Nobody answered. Daniel frowned. "Dad?" Richard recovered first. Your mother is overreacting to a few financial misunderstandings. I almost admired how fast he rewrote reality. Financial misunderstandings, not deception, hidden cash, or years of pure manipulation. Daniel looked confused. What kind of misunderstandings? I spoke up before Richard could. Your father has been hiding money from me for years. Daniel blinked. What? Richard sighed sharply. It's more complicated than that. No, I said quietly. It really isn't. I walked to the dining table, grabbed the bank statements from my folder, and handed them to Daniel. He scanned the pages slowly, his face twisted from confusion to disbelief, then to something much darker. What is this? Richard stepped forward immediately. Those are business structures you wouldn't understand without context. Daniel looked up. Why is there another woman's name on these accounts? Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Richard's voice turned firm. Linda assisted with transitional accounting after retirement. Daniel stared at us. You hid this from Mom. It wasn't her responsibility. The moment those words left his mouth, even he seemed to realize how terrible they sounded. Daniel lowered the papers. Jesus, Dad. Richard's frustration boiled over. Oh, don't you start acting morally superior. Everything I did was for this family. That's not true, I whispered. It is true. You let Megan struggle. That's different. How? I demanded. He snapped toward me. Because Megan makes emotional decisions just like you. The room went dead silent. Daniel stared at him in shock, and I saw the shift. For the first time, our son truly saw his father. Not the calm provider or the wise mentor, but a selfish man, desperately trying to justify himself. Right then, the front door opened again. Megan walked in carrying Liam's backpack and immediately sensed the freezing tension. What happened? Nobody spoke. Then, Daniel quietly handed her the files. Megan read the papers. Halfway through, her face dropped. You had money? Richard stepped forward. Megan, you had money this entire time. It's complicated. Tears filled her eyes. Oh my God. Megan, listen. No, she snapped. You watched me drown. Richard went stiff. That's unfair. Unfair? Her voice cracked. I worked double shifts while you hid cash in a safe. Liam appeared in the hallway, looking terrified. I rushed over to my grandson. It's okay, sweetheart. But nothing was okay. The thin illusion holding us together had finally shattered. Daniel collapsed onto the sofa, staring at the pages as if he no longer recognized his own father. Megan sobbed openly, while Richard just stood there, looking like a man watching his absolute control slip away in real time. For decades, he controlled every narrative. But lies collapse differently when everyone is looking at them together. Standing in our living room, surrounded by the family he claimed to protect, my husband finally looked like what he truly was. Not powerful, not wise, just terrified. 3 weeks later, he sat across from me in a downtown mediation office, looking sleepless. Neither of us had slept, but the exhaustion wore differently on us. He looked irritated. I just felt finished. The room itself was painfully neutral. Beige walls, a long conference table, coffee growing cold beside untouched legal pads. Patricia sat calmly at my side reviewing documents while his attorney, Stephen Keller, whispered in his ear, "No family photos on these walls. No wedding rings mattered anymore. Just cold facts, numbers, and paper trails. Our truth reduced to documentation." He avoided looking at me at first. That alone showed how much had changed. For nearly 40 years, he had controlled every single room he entered. He looked like a man desperately trying to calculate the damage. Our mediator, an older woman named Janet Collins, folded her hands carefully. "Our goal today is resolution," she said calmly. Richard nodded stiffly. My lawyer, Patricia, remained expressionless. I just sat there quietly, watching the man I once trusted more than anyone in the world. Janet turned toward Richard first. "Mr. Holmes, your attorney indicated there may have been financial misunderstandings within the marriage," Janet said. Patricia almost smiled beside me. Financial misunderstandings? Everyone kept trying to soften his betrayal with polite language. Richard cleared his throat. "I handled our finances throughout the marriage," Richard said. "Some investments were structured separately for tax purposes." Patricia immediately slid several documents across the table. These tax structures included concealed marital assets transferred over approximately 11 years, Patricia countered. Richard's jaw tightened. His lawyer, Stephen, quickly interrupted. "We dispute the characterization of concealment." Patricia remained calm. "Then perhaps you can explain why my client was excluded from account access, beneficiary information, and associated properties." Silence. Richard shifted uncomfortably. The mediator studied the documents carefully. "These accounts total substantial amounts." Substantial. Another polite word. Patricia opened another folder. "We also have evidence of intentional planning regarding post-separation asset protection," Patricia added. Richard looked sharply toward me, not angry but wounded, as if he still couldn't believe I actually fought back. That expression almost hurt more than his lies, because deep down he truly believed I would remain quiet forever. Patricia slid his handwritten retirement notes across the table. Janet adjusted her glasses, reading silently. Then she looked directly at Richard. "Did you write this?" A long pause. "Yes." "And what exactly did you mean by post-separation liquidity?" Richard exhaled heavily. "I was preparing for possible future instability." His answer sounded so coldly corporate that even Stephen looked uncomfortable. Patricia leaned forward slightly. "You mean divorce?" Richard's silence answered for him. I expected to feel rage hearing him cornered like this. Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of excuses, tired of manipulation, tired of watching him search for words clever enough to erase years of dishonesty. Janet turned toward me gently. "Mrs. Holmes, what outcome are you seeking today?" The question surprised me. A month ago, my answer would have been highly emotional. I want justice. I wanted him to hurt the way I hurt. But sitting there now, I realized something important. I no longer needed revenge. I needed peace. "I want fairness," I said quietly. Richard looked down immediately. That reaction mattered more than words, because deep down, even he knew fairness was the one thing he never intended to give me. Patricia continued presenting our evidence methodically after that. Transfer records, hidden accounts, joint filings connected to Linda Graves. retirement planning notes, and property ownership. As more files appeared, Richard grew quieter, until Janet finally asked the question we had all avoided. Who is Linda Graves exactly? Richard rubbed both hands over his face slowly. An administrative associate from consulting work, he muttered. Patricia slid another folder forward. Ms. Graves is prepared to testify regarding the hidden asset arrangements. Richard's head snapped upward. She what? Patricia's voice remained calm. She cooperated fully. I watched genuine panic cross his face for the first time. Not frustration or annoyance, but real fear, because Linda had been the one helping him maintain the illusion. Now even that protection was gone. Stephen leaned toward Richard, whispering urgently, but Richard barely listened anymore. He suddenly looked exhausted, old. For years, I imagined this confrontation would feel triumphant. Instead, it just felt sad, because beneath the anger and betrayal sat one unavoidable truth. I had loved this man deeply, and now we sat across from each other, discussing our marriage like a failed business contract. Patricia spoke up. My client sacrificed career advancement and financial independence under his repeated claims that finances were limited, Patricia said. Janet nodded thoughtfully. That creates significant equity concerns. Richard suddenly spoke sharply. I worked my entire life for this family. I looked at him calmly. And I gave my entire life to it. The room fell silent, because both statements were true, but only one of us had secretly protected themselves at the other's expense. Richard stared at me for a long moment, then finally asked quietly, Was any of it real to you? The question stunned everyone, including me. I answered honestly, Yes. My voice shook slightly. That is why this hurts so much. He looked away. For the first time since everything collapsed, he seemed unable to escape the weight of his actions. Not just the money, the deception, the lost years, the slow erosion of trust. Janet eventually called for a short break. I stepped into the hallway alone, clutching a paper cup of coffee I didn't really want. A few seconds later, my son, Daniel, appeared near the elevators. I blinked in surprise. What are you doing here? He shoved his hands into his pockets awkwardly. I wanted to check on you. Something inside my chest softened instantly. Daniel looked exhausted too, guilty and ashamed. I should have seen it sooner, he admitted quietly. This isn't your fault. I always believed him. I looked down at my coffee. So did I. Daniel swallowed hard. I keep replaying things now. What things? The way Dad talked to you sometimes. The money stuff. How careful you always were around him. Careful. Megan used that exact same word weeks ago. Funny how children notice emotional patterns long before parents admit them. His voice lowered. I thought that was just marriage. I looked at my son and realized something deeply painful. Richard had not just shaped me. He shaped how our kids saw love too. Gently touching Daniel's arm, I whispered, Listen to me closely. He nodded. This ends with me. Pain washed over his face. When we walked back into the mediation room, Richard looked smaller somehow, less sure of himself. Janet calmly reviewed the final paperwork, splitting assets, retirement accounts, property divisions, and legal disclosures. Patricia fought hard beside me while Richard sat mostly silent. Then, after hours of heavy silence, Stephen leaned in toward his client one last time. Richard listened in silence, nodding slowly, defeated. "I'll agree," he whispered quietly. "No big speech, no explosion, just surrender." Janet sighed softly. "Then we have our settlement framework." I looked across that table at Richard one last time. He looked like he wanted to speak, maybe apologize, maybe explain. Instead, he just stared at me. It was the look of a man realizing too late that the woman he underestimated was no longer afraid. And that was the real end of our marriage. Not the hidden cash or the legal papers. It was the moment I stopped needing his approval. 6 months after the divorce was final, I stood barefoot in my tiny backyard, water hose in hand, watching warm sunlight spill over my new lavender. The air smelled of wet dirt and spring rain, and for the first time in years, I actually felt at peace. Not ecstatic, not triumphant, just peaceful. Funny how people think freedom arrives like fireworks. For me, it came quietly, in tiny moments, like making coffee in a kitchen where nobody judged what I spent on groceries, buying fresh flowers just because I liked them, opening a bank account without fear, sleeping through the night without wondering what secrets lay hidden. After the settlement, I bought a small one-story house about 15 minutes from Megan's place. Nothing fancy at all. Just 2 bedrooms, cream walls, and a front porch swing I instantly loved. Richard kept the big house. Honestly, I did not care. I had finally realized that house was never actually a home, because peace cannot live where trust dies slowly. Megan helped me decorate the rooms. One afternoon, while we hung curtains, she suddenly laughed. "What?" I asked. "You keep smiling," she said. I blinked. "Do I?" "Yes," she said, studying me. "You never used to." Those words haunted me for days. I had not even realized how much heavy tension I had been carrying in my own skin, always walking on eggshells, constantly adjusting, trying to keep the peace around Richard. Now, the silence felt lighter. My body seemed to understand freedom before my mind could. Liam loved the new place right away, especially the backyard. "Grandma," he announced proudly one Saturday while planting tomatoes beside me. "This place feels happy." Kids always know. They feel emotional truth way faster than grown-ups. A few weeks later, Daniel came over by himself, holding a toolbox. "I noticed your kitchen cabinet is hanging crooked," he said awkwardly. I smiled softly. "Come on in." We spent the afternoon fixing minor things while old classic rock played softly from the radio. Suddenly, Daniel stopped tightening a screw and looked at me, completely serious. "I owe you an apology." I set my coffee down slowly. "For what?" "For believing Dad over you for all those years." A knot tightened in my chest. "You were raised to trust him." "That is no excuse." I stared at my son standing in my small kitchen, tears pooling in his eyes. Suddenly, I did not see a grown man. I saw the little boy who used to run to me after a nightmare. "I should have noticed how he treated you," he whispered. I pulled him into a tight hug before he could say another word. "Listen to me closely." He nodded against my shoulder. "You are not responsible for your father's choices." I pulled back gently. "The best thing you can do now is build a healthier life for yourself." Daniel wept quietly then, and so did I. Because healing a family often starts the very moment someone finally speaks the truth out loud. Richard rang my phone several times during those early months. In the beginning, I picked up occasionally, mostly out of old habit. Our calls always went the same way, filled with regret, excuses, and confusion. "You blew up our whole life over money," he snapped bitterly one day. I remember standing in my garden, holding the phone in a tight grip. "No, Richard," I replied calmly. "You ruined us with your lies." Silence. Then he whispered, "I never stopped loving you." Hearing that hurt worse than anger, because maybe he actually believed it. Maybe a part of him really did love me the only way he knew how. But love without truth always becomes something else. Control, possession, and dependency. And I no longer mistook those toxic things for real devotion. Eventually, I stopped answering him. Not to be cruel, but because each call dragged me backward emotionally. I had fought far too hard to finally take a step forward. One Tuesday morning, 8 months after the divorce, I signed up for an art class for older women at our local community center. The old me never would have set foot in there. Too expensive, too unnecessary, too selfish. At least, according to the strict rules I lived under for decades. But now, I sat beside widows, retirees, and survivors of heartbreak, painting terrible watercolors and laughing harder than I had in years. A woman named Eleanor glanced over at me during class and smiled. "You seem lighter lately." I laughed softly. I think I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. She toasted me with her coffee cup. "That will change your whole life." And she was right. Between the legal papers, the lavender, and those clumsy art classes, I finally found myself again. Not my younger self, and not the woman I was before Richard. Someone completely new and far stronger. It was nearly sunset. I sat alone on my porch swing, watching birds settle into the trees as a warm breeze drifted through the neighborhood. My phone buzzed softly beside me. A text from Richard. "I miss you." 3 simple words. Once upon a time, they would have completely shattered me. This time, I just stared at the screen in silence. Then I flipped it face down and looked toward the fading sunset instead. Because missing someone does not erase what they did to you. And loneliness is not the same thing as accountability. For years, I believed a woman's greatest duty was saving her marriage at all costs. I know better now. Sometimes, the bravest thing a woman can do is refuse to disappear inside a version of love that is not her own. The truth is, Richard did not just steal money from our marriage. He stole years of certainty, years of confidence, years where I believed my needs mattered less than his plans. But in the end, he lost something too. Not the house, not the accounts, but me. Strangely, that was the one thing he never prepared for, because the woman he spent decades underestimating eventually learned how to survive without his permission. If there is one thing I have learned through all of this, it is that betrayal rarely starts with one giant lie. It began in small moments where my voice became smaller and smaller, until I stopped trusting my own instincts. I spent years believing sacrifice was the same thing as love. It is not. Real love does not require one person to become invisible just so the other can feel powerful. And if you are watching this later in life, please hear me when I say this. It is never too late to reclaim yourself. Not at 62, not at 70, not after divorce, heartbreak, betrayal, or disappointment. Your life still belongs to you. Sometimes healing begins the moment you stop begging someone else to finally value you and start valuing yourself instead. If my story touched you in any way, I would truly love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal or heartbreak? Where are you watching from tonight? I read more comments than you probably realize, and your stories deeply matter to me too. If you enjoyed this journey with me, do not forget to like and subscribe for more emotional storytelling about family resilience and finding strength again after life breaks your heart.